The land area required for this huge enterprise of urban expansion equates to producing a city the size of New York every 8 days. So really the challenge that is before us is really quite immense. In addition to the land area that cities are taking up, cities are the powerhouses of consumption and carbon emissions. And so through their use of natural resources, they're driving the transformations of ecosystems, not just locally, but also across the globe. And yet nature, non-human plants, animals, other species can and does thrive alongside us as humans in cities and towns. And I'm sure that for many of us, we've observed this, and particularly during lockdown, I'm sure many of us have found that our local green spaces and the flora and fauna that they contain have really been a lifeline for us, and a real source of our mental health and restoration for us. So given this significance of urban areas, both locally and globally, we're going to be exploring today the characteristics of urban environments, some of their current challenges, and to explore together what possible sustainable futures might look like in an urban setting. So to take us there, it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel today. We have 4 panelists joining us. We have Penney Poyzer, Bryony Norton, Professor Lucelia Rodrigues, and Alan Simpson. So Penney Poyzer is an author, presenter, an environmental change maker, and the director of Nottingham Good Food Partnership, which is an organisation promoting sustainable food practices and acting as a voice for the citizens of Nottingham. Penney has been involved in Nottingham's local food growing scene for about 30 years or even more, and is a passionate urban permaculture gardener and a keen forager. Bryony Norton is a lecturer in landscape ecology at the University of Derby with expertise in urban environments. Brownie has held previous research positions at the University of Melbourne and at the University of Sheffield, and has particular interests in how land use change influences biodiversity and the provision of ecosystem services. A question that she is particularly focused on is understanding how we can plan and manage urban areas that support biodiversity, whilst also considering and taking account of the needs and preferences for people in cities. Professor Lucelia Rodrigues is a professor of sustainable and resilient cities here at the University of Nottingham in the Department of Architecture and Built Environment. Her work is cross-disciplinary and focuses on how we can really enhance the quality of the built environment. And her interests are particularly in the resilience, not just of the built environment, but the communities in which live within them. And particularly trying to combat issues of climate change in that context. And she's had extensive experience working in and amongst local communities, particularly with an emphasis on energy and design. And finally, Alan Simpson is, in his own words, a recovering politician and a lapsed economist. Alan was the Labour MP for Nottingham South from 1992 till 2010. And he's currently the Shadow Chancellor's Advisor on Sustainable Economics and continues to be actively involved in work on environmental sustainability at a range of different scales, both nationally and locally here in Nottingham. So again, a big thank you to our 4 panelists for joining us today. Before we get any further, let me just outline the structure of today's session. So we will have, to begin with, some short reflections by our panelists, around 5 minutes each. And that will then lead us into a discussion amongst the panelists where we explore some of these questions around how to tackle these challenges that urban environments face. And then after that time, we'll move into a time of open question and answer with you as the audience for today. Just some housekeeping then before we move into the presentations. We're going to be recording this session. Hopefully you've all seen that notification already, but we'll be recording the first half where we have our presentations and discussion, but not the questions. So feel free, if you don't be put off by being recorded if you'd like to ask some questions. In terms of asking questions, you can do that 2 ways. either by putting it directly into the chat, and we'll be monitoring that, but we understand some people haven't been able to access that. So if you can't see the chat, or if you'd prefer to ask your question in person, please just raise your hand. And you'll see, if you look at the top of your screen, there should be an icon of a hand, funnily enough, that you can press to indicate that you'd like to ask a question, and then we'll call on you to ask that. As I said, please keep your cameras and mics off unless you're speaking or one of the panelists. And I'm sure you're all going to be really engaged in what we're talking about, and you might be wanting to tweet about this. If that's the case, there is a Twitter handle that we're using to host this whole conference, which is, I'm going to put it in the chat now. It's at LCE_RPA, which is Life in Changing Environments Research Priority Area here at the University of Nottingham. So without further ado, please can I hand over to some short introductions by our panelists. And to kick off, can we start with Penney, please? Over to you, Penney.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. So as Chris said, I'm Penney Poyzer, and today I'm wearing 3 invisible hats. I'm chair of Nottingham Good Food Partnership, which is part of the National Network of Sustainable Food Places, and our focus is on building a sustainable and equitable food system. I'm also a pioneer of the deep ecological retrofit movement through my Victorian home in West Bridgford, which is just over the Trent from the city. And I'm a member of the Nottingham Green Quarter visioning team for the Broadmarsh development site. So today I'd like to give a kind of a snapshot on my view of how, by viewing the built environment differently and applying a permaculture approach to both new build and retrofit development opportunities, we can transform the urban environment. So I just want you to imagine, if you will, that you're a bird flying over the city, and imagine our largely grey built environment immersed in an edible urban landscape. So that's food for humans and forage and increasing biodiversity. And when we fully utilise the horizontal and vertical opportunities presented by ground level, walls and roofs, we can provide food for humans and increase biodiversity, and also build or retrofit low energy buildings. Also, at the same time, we can ameliorate surface water flooding and improve air quality. So that sounds all, quite a big wish list, but I'd like to share with you how this has been achieved on a micro level by myself and my husband, Gil Shalom, with our ecologically retrofitted Victorian home. So our 3-storey semi is an archetype common across the UK. They're big, energy-hungry homes sitting cheek by jowl on very modest garden plots. So myself and Gil, who's a passive architect, coined something that we call the whole plot approach. And we've retrofitted our water, food and energy systems across our entire plot by the house and garden working together synergistically. And through doing this retrofit, we've reduced emissions by 90%, reduced our water use up to 2/3 of the national average. We grow food using regenerative permaculture practices, and we send no organic waste beyond our boundaries. So how have we also stimulated biodiversity? Well, by again using the power of the vertical meter, we've installed 4 green roofs in our back garden, and that grows food, and we've created mini wildflower meadows. We also madly installed the UK's most radical domestic sustainable urban drainage system, installed a mini orchard and veg beds in our front garden, and we manage all rainfall on site and send nothing to the main drainage system. So, this micro exemplar is all very well, but how can we apply this at scale? Well, as many of you will know, Nottingham has been in the international news. The New York Times recently featured a really extensive editorial on the financial collapse of the Broadmarsh shopping centre, which is right in the heart of Nottingham. And it's a sprawling 22-acre site that left the City Council with an enormous headache. But to their credit, they had the vision to put a challenge out to individuals and organisations to come up with their vision of what could arise, phoenix-like, from the remains of this concrete canyon. So they launched something called the Big Conversation. There was over 3,000 submissions, and a group called the Broadmarsh Advisory Board has been reviewing all the proposals and is now putting together technical and creative teams to start this long road to transformation. What was absolutely clear from the responses was an overwhelming call that the site should be green and should provide access to nature, and above all should not include a shopping mall. So myself and 5 other interested citizens who are deeply committed to sustainable development put together a vision for a new green quarter, and we launched that on a Facebook page which has got over 6,000 followers now. And we became part of a green umbrella organisation chaired by Alan Simpson, where other organisations, including the Wildlife Trust, put in green proposals, and the aim of the group is to keep the pressure on the powers that be to deliver a truly green, nature-first development. Now, our Green Quarter vision includes high-quality affordable housing, co-working spaces, a strong economic base that makes the most of our vibrant independent sector, and a place to access nature, but also to access fresh, affordable food. So our vision is for a deep green approach that would create a place that's fit for purpose for future generations. This is not a development that we could look at and say it will be 50 years, who cares? This has got to make a difference to the future generations in Nottingham. So as a group, we were committed to the idea that it is possible to live, work and play in the heart and half of the city, and to do that with harmony within nature. Now, you're probably aware that the future of retail is in flux all over the country. In fact, globally, vast shopping centres are going bust. And we have to rethink our high streets and our city centres and breathe life back into it. But those solutions must be sustainable. So just looking at food systems for a moment, the global food system accounts for 37% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's a broken system. And in the UK, supplies of fresh fruit and veg are largely imported from other countries. These are under threat. It's increasingly expensive due to Brexit and climate impacts. And it's therefore vital, not just my opinion, that urban nature and urban agriculture intersect in this new paradigm of city living. And as Chris said earlier, by 2050, 70% of populations will live in urban centres. And also by 2050 in the UK, we've got to grow 70% more food than we grow now just to tread water. And also, of course, if we shorten supply chains, we can also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, urban agriculture sounds terribly newfangled, but Nottingham 300 years ago was a big visitor attraction. With Daniel Defoe actually calling Nottingham the Garden City of England. And there's wonderful maps actually showing the extent of urban agriculture within the city. So it's really about learning from history and how we can improve upon it. So also when we take measures to use the vertical and roof space for food growing and increasing biodiversity, when this is done well, it can be hugely complementary, and it's a challenge we must seize.
Thank you very much, Penny. That's there's some real inspiring ideas in that I look forward to digging into this afternoon. Thank you. Our next panelist then is, let's move to Bryony. Bryony Norton, over to you.
Oh, thanks, Chris. And I guess I wanted to talk a bit about some of the reasons for incorporating some of these really exciting ideas that Penny's been talking about. They're really fantastic applications of some of these concepts. So I wanted to suggest that those sorts of concepts and bringing green areas into cities and incorporating nature into everything we do is really fundamental to how we develop our cities into the future. And if we don't do this, this is going to be to the detriment not just of biodiversity, which we know is in global crisis, but to us as well. And so, of course, we know that urban environments are designed and built for human requirements primarily, and they're highly altered environments. So the physical space is altered. We can think of buildings and roads instead of vegetation. And we've changed all of the conditions as well. So temperature, wind flow, pollution are all parts of our environment. And if we're thinking about this, I'm thinking about this from the perspective of an ecologist and thinking about the plants and animals in that environment. And we see that these are hugely changed environments that are, and that's much harder. More of these changes that we make, the harder it is for other organisms to persist in these environments with us. But despite this, we share our cities with lots and lots of plants and animals, lots of different types of species, above and below ground, which is another area that we make some really dramatic modifications to. And cities harbour lots of species and a lot more than people expect. Just at a very small scale, there's a lovely study by a lady called Jennifer Owen, who surveyed her own garden for 30 years and recorded more than 2,500 species just in the space of a garden. So even just in those very small areas where we're seeing lots and lots of lots of variety within the city. But cities can also harbour really rare species. We think of pigeons and rats, but there are lots of rare species in cities as well. And this is in part because sometimes cities are developed around, for example, areas of ancient woodland that are then protected in the long term because they're enclosed. Even some very human-focused developments, for example, churchyards, for the same reason, they're maintained for very long periods of time in the same way. They can also harbour some really rare and important species. So our cities are these havens for wildlife in a way that we often don't think about them because they are really developed for humans principally. And globally, as I'm sure everybody here knows, we're in a biodiversity crisis, and those local actions are really important. How we respond locally really is really important for to this global response in this global crisis. And of course, urban areas are hubs of development and regular land use change. There's regular change at a local scale and local turnover, but cities are expanding all the time. And so why is it important that we think about conserving biodiversity in these very human-focused areas? And one of them is we've got this classic kind of conservation imperative not to do any more harm than we're already done. We've got ethical and legal obligations to look after biodiversity in our local urban environments. But as Chris was saying, like urban environments at the moment, they don't take up that much of the total global terrestrial land surface area, but they're growing, and they're growing really fast. And they're going to become more significant areas as environments in themselves. So urban environments are one of the environments, along with deserts and rainforests across our world. So we need to think about what's going on with them for biodiversity in terms of tackling the biodiversity crisis globally. And it's not just about the physical space that urban areas occupy, it's of course about the people as well. And more than, as Chris said again, more than half the world's population and more than 80% of the UK population have their daily exposure to nature in an urban context. And there's really good evidence now that people's exposure to and engagement with nature influences their actions towards the natural world, influences their actions towards biodiversity. So it's really critical that we have that, ensure that people have that daily experience of nature and that daily, so that they can develop their ideas about what biodiversity is, what we can expect, what we should have, and how we should behave towards the natural world. And of course, then it's not just that nature depends to some extent on us, but we depend on nature. Nature provides us with so many different benefits, including, of course, food production, as Penny has been talking about, but clean air, you know, in a very economic perspective. If you live near a park, you'll have likely to have higher property prices, and more abstract things like we get inspiration for our poetry and writing from nature. So we get all sorts of benefits from the natural world. And people live primarily now in urban environments, as we've said, and so that's where people are primarily getting that experience of those benefits from nature. And this is going to be increasingly important under climate change, because although some of the benefits we'll get are from the wider world, some of the very local changes that we require to ensure our own health and well-being, for example, maintaining temperatures that are stable and that we can live within, reducing, you know, extreme temperatures, that has to be done locally. So how do we manage under climate change? If we introduce more vegetation and more nature into urban environments, that can help us manage under a changing climate. Similarly, nature can really help us with mitigating flooding, again another climate risk, and with producing food locally, therefore reducing our supply chain. And so despite all of this, though, nature and biodiversity are unfortunately not always the first thing thought of in when we're planning urban environments, although this is perhaps, we hope, changing. And so what do we need to do? We need to think about creating, maintaining and prioritising nature in urban areas alongside other types of infrastructure. And I'm sure many people here know that the term green infrastructure, well, we think of vegetation as a type of infrastructure, so we can think of it alongside our roads and our buildings, and we can maintain it in that and prioritise it in that same way. And we want to be able to plan and manage that network and that infrastructure systematically, so that it's multifunctional, so that we can get those benefits for biodiversity, but also for all of the people who live in the world, in this urban environment. But that needs to be done in a really planned way, or else we won't achieve those goals. And if we think about that whole network of green infrastructure, we have to think about both public and private lands. In the UK, there's a lot of green areas and cities that are owned by private individuals. If we think about residential gardens, for example, they're a very high proportion of the green space in cities. So we want to be thinking as well about everybody working together. How do we get individuals and working on their own land and working in a collective way with public lands to ensure, particularly for biodiversity, that doesn't see those property ownership boundaries? How do we get that maximum benefit for everybody, for us and for wildlife? And to achieve this, of course, we can draw on a lot of existing knowledge, but there's lots of room for creative solutions and to reimagine our cities using creative solutions and to develop new ways of working. So that's really all I wanted to say.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bryony. What a really compelling case for taking seriously the nature on our doorsteps. I love that statistic as well, around 2,500 species in a single garden. That's extraordinary. Wonderful. So let's move on now to Lucelia. I'd love to hear some thoughts from you.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Brownie and Penney, for the great thought-provoking connotations. I come from a background, so you've heard my title, Sustainable Resilient Cities Chair, which, as I like to say, is suitably broad, because my background is in the design of buildings and communities. And through doing that and working in comfort and energy efficiency and carbon management for the last decade, I stumbled across the issue that we all face, the issue of conflict of interest and difficulties in prioritizing what we need to do. So I absolutely agree with both Penney and Bryony. We need more greenery in cities, we need more nature, we need to give space for nature, we need more food. More than that, we need more sustainable food for everybody. And that's absolutely, they should be priorities. However, we also have other fundamental issues to address. One of them being the issue of climate change, that we kind of let go a little bit in the last couple of years with other priorities and fighting fires around COVID and dealing with those. But this is a really, really fundamental issue that will mean that no cities are going to perform anymore, or nature is going to be able to spread and work, and biodiversity to be more and more threatened. So in order to address the issue of global warming, we need to try to keep temperatures below, or the raising temperatures below 1.5 degrees. What does that mean? It means we have to get rid of all greenhouse gases emissions by 2050. And that really is tomorrow, because the enormity of this task is just scary. To give you a bit of a picture of what it means, so we are familiar with Nottingham, so I use Nottingham as an example. In a very quick calculation, we have about 135,000 homes in Nottingham. About 58% of them are EPC level below C, so which means their level of energy efficiency is below the desirable level that we should be at from this year to next year maximum. So we need to bring all those homes to that level. Let's say in average, they'll be emitting about 4.4 tons of carbon per home from those 58%. And let's imagine that we can actually make them all come to EPC level of C within the next couple of years. And this is very hard, but we're not talking about making them all zero carbon, just getting them good enough. Yeah, and I'm talking to you from my very cold Victorian home, when in June, I feel I need the heating on. So it is a very hard task, and I work in the field. But if we did do that, we brought them all up to a level C, they'll be emitting only about 2.2 tons of carbon per year, so reduced significantly. But that will still leave us with circa 300,000 tons of carbon emissions just from housing, the majority of it from heating, just in Nottingham, and just from the existing housing, not counting new. Now, what does that mean? Then that means about 2 million trees, or at least 44,000 acres of trees per year, just to deal with the carbon emissions from home if we were to offset that. 4,000 acres is about a quarter of the size of the whole of Nottingham. So we do need nature, we need loads of it, but we can't not address the really significant issue that emissions need to be dealt with at that level, at the demand level, at where we're forming, what we're doing, how we're dealing with it. And I think that's very fundamental, and it comes in conflict with the other needs that you guys have pointed out. We also know, Chris pointed out, we are urban species, but we only been urban species for 12 years. Do we know that? Because our urban population only surpassed our rural population in 2009. Now, it took us 300,000 years to be the humans we are today. And we only been an urban population, or majority of our population, since 2009. We don't really know what we're doing yet. There's a lot to learn, and there's a lot for us to think in terms of where is the priority for which city, for which population, and who needs more, and as something we always have to give. And a lot of this that we have to do is that we have to be just weighing all those priorities. We need to be delivering a built environment that is net zero carbon, so we can address the fundamental issue. But we need to do that by focusing on people and delivering a built environment that is designed for people to live happily and healthily, and for people to live lifestyles where they don't need to emit a lot of carbon, because the city enables them to live their lifestyle. We also need to enable them to be able to access greenery, and we need that greenery to be active and productive, not just sitting there because we needed to look out of the window and see a bit more green, but something that enhances biodiversity, that supports the wider ecosystems, that supports the population, and that gives maybe food back as something that actually helps people to engage with the city and have that sense of ownership that we need. So we all respond to the challenge in a much better way. And of course, none of this can happen if it doesn't make financial sense, because green spaces will cost whoever put a green space there, whoever has to maintain the green space. And the moment we have a large green space and it's not maintained, we are going to complain. We're not going to like that. We're going to, as citizens, we're going to be saying, well, this needs to be kept to a level that I can enjoy, that I can actually go and plant my strawberries and my apples and collect them at the end of the day. So in order to make that a reality, we're going to need to make net zero carbon communities that are sustainable, that are productive, that allows enough nature and food growth within it to be financially viable, and make sure that there's an investable proposition that will deliver against all of those tasks. And for that, I ask audience I know there's lots of bright people joining us today. It is a task for all of us, because prioritizing and deciding who gets more and who gets dropped is a very difficult job. And it's a job for very clever people to get heads together and collaboratively decide on what the solutions are.
Thank you, Lucelia. That's a challenge for us, isn't it? You've outlined quite articulately the scale of the challenge before us. So thank you for that. And yes, something that I think we all need to be looking at how we can play our part in moving towards that kind of future that you've outlined. So I throw now to Alan Simpson. Would you mind just in 5 minutes giving us a quick snapshot of some thoughts of how we can attend to this challenge? You're on mute, Alan. Let me see if I can.
Okay, can you? We
can hear you now.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And actually, the other panelists have really set the scene for me. And Lucelia has, I think, almost preempted my opening comment, which is that we are in a colossal mess, and that we have gone past the time where small scale thinking, fragmented thinking, has any place at all. We have to really engage with big ideas because they're the only ones that are going to work. And universities, I think, are now going to have to step up to the plate and engage with that radical joined up thinking in a way that universities haven't done for the last 40 years. And the good news is that if you look at the things that Penney was saying at the start, actually communities now are much more open to radical, transformative, integrated change than at any other time in my lifetime. The problem is that government has forgotten how to govern. Government leaders have lost the grasp of how to lead in the face of a climate crisis that they tried to live in denial of. Last week, the Climate Change Committee put it in a nutshell when they said that Britain is woefully unprepared for the climate upheavals that are already baked into place for the coming decade. And what we have to recognize is that we have new benchmarks that we're all going to have to address if we want to survive. And one of those is that we have to cut UK carbon emissions in half within the current decade. Yes, it's important to have targets for 2050, but there is no road that can be kicked down that doesn't require us to meet staging points. And that 50% reduction within the decade is, I think, a challenge that has to be met intellectually and practically. And the leader's going to have to come, I think, from outside governance. That's where you, as the critics, the conveners of ideas, if you like, need to put yourself in the center of that arena. What would you do? First of all, I think we have to gather together the sort of ideas that Penney offered in relation to her house and put them into a basket that says, actually, other places are already rapidly moving into this space anyway. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can borrow and pinch and pull ideas from elsewhere. Like what? Well, like the fact that Paris, Anne Hidalgo, as the mayor of Paris, has already installed 100 hectares of vertical gardens in the city on existing buildings. Like the fact that last week she declared that they would be taking, by the end of this year, they would have taken 140,000 existing car parking spaces out and handing them back to pedestrians and parks and nature, so that we can stop doing the things that are destructive and begin to do things that are constructive instead. Penney talked about urban food systems. Well, in Montreal, which has winters of minus 30 degrees, they have an organization called Lufa Farms that has taken over the ownership of factory roofs and putting greenhouses on there, taking the heat from within the factories as a source of heating for the greenhouses. And as things stand, they are producing all year round enough food for 20,000 food trolleys a week within that urban environment. Lille in France has been in discussions with the hinterland of rural communities around Lille, such that they intend within the next 4 years to be able to provide 50% of their food needs from within the urban rural food consortium. And so we need to be pushing into that. The examples that Lucelia made about heat, well, we're sitting on a coal mining area. It's estimated that the UK has 25,000 abandoned coal mines that are now flooded with full of hot water. 1 in 4 of the urban population live within supply distance of that. And you have the ability to follow towns like Heerlen in the Netherlands that has drilled down, put in closed water pipes to pipe up the hot water and duct it in a form of local district heating to provide renewable heat with no pollution and in a sustainable way for a city of, I think it's 35,000 people. And we need to be pinching and pooling those ideas and replicating them wherever we can. Nottingham has a fantastic commitment to have a 2028 zero carbon neutral commitment. But in reality, it is being driven down a path where each time the planning committee meets and approves a new building, it is compounding the problems that will put that target further out of reach. And the city says, well, we don't have the powers to turn them down. Well, at the very least, we have to embolden them to say in their planning reports, this building would be a disaster for the future. It would be a catastrophe, but we don't have the powers to refuse it. So these people should be criminals, but we have to give them planning consent. Actually forcing this onto the agenda of what really truly will define whether we have sustainable urban and rural environments is the critical challenge that has to be faced within this decade. The great news, as I say, is that everywhere that I look, you have communities that are hungry for a complete inversion of economics in favor of something that puts back more than it takes out, that embraces circularity rather than unlimited growth, and in which security of engagement and security of connectedness, it becomes the centerpiece of a different sort of future. And if we can reach out to that, and if universities and academics like yourselves can give that lead, then we might just do it.
That's a challenge. Thank you, Alan. And I think certainly one that universities do need to heed. And I think there's a role to be played, right, from every urban citizen and every organisation here. Yeah, thank you for those reflections. And I think together, all four excellent presentations have really set out simultaneously kind of a hopeful vision, of creative ideas that we can start moving in a sustainable future direction, but also some real challenges and impediments there. So I wondered, maybe to kick us off by way of discussion, a question with two parts. So what are those signs of life, if you like, or signs of this positive, sustainable future that you have observed? We've heard some of them already, but also what are the things that need to change? How do we get there? I think it would be nice if, we've got about 20 minutes left to be able to discuss a little bit around how do we move in that direction? How do we overcome some of those barriers? So maybe can I just throw to each of you in turn, and then we'll see where that conversation goes. So Penny, any thoughts on that? You're on mute, Penny.
From the point of view of urban food growing, which of course is a massive thing, I think the national network of sustainable food places, which includes pioneering cities like Brighton and Bristol, loads of stuff happening across cities all over the country, where these organisations, which are community based, and that's absolutely critical, they're not led by local authorities. Local authorities are partners. And the vast majority of the work is coming up from the grassroots. It's coming from places like community kitchens, which have sustained thousands of people using volunteers and surplus food from the supply chain to literally feed thousands of people who otherwise would not be fed. So I think the power of community that's really come as part of our our pandemic epoch, because obviously we're still in it, is that we really need to drill down to this idea of resilience and localism. And again, that's coming from quite a permaculture perspective. It's what is available right on our doorstep. What are the systems and the skills and the availability of resources that we can use in a hyper efficient way to deliver very low cost solutions. So I think that there's just so much work going on that you could fill an encyclopedia with the activity that's going on. But the real issue for me is that whilst this wealth of activity is going on, it is not recognised or funded by central government. None of the money actually comes down to community groups who are largely paying themselves for this to happen. So it's about equality largely. And as we know, climate change and any major catastrophe affects the most vulnerable first, and that vulnerability lasts the longest. So you know, we've got to have a sense of far greater convergence from grassroots to government. Alan knows far more than we do on a very intimate level of the problems that go with that. So I think, again, for me, the focus is absolutely on strengthening communities and building resilience.
Thank you, Penny. Bryony, is that something that you see for urban conservation when we're thinking about plants and animals? Is it at the grassroots, at the sort of community level, where you see most hopeful change, and is there a need to join that up to centralised policy?
I think that you need a little bit of both. You need to have that grassroots will, but sometimes you need big, bold statements from somebody coming in from above, and that can come from a grassroots organisation. It's a nice example in Liverpool at the moment where something like that's happening. So there's a lot of, I think there's quite a lot of biodiversity action that's being focused around meadows right now. I mean, meadows have become, you know, something that everybody can do. You can put them in your garden, you can put them in parks, and it can make a real difference for biodiversity. And we've seen that as a sort of an action people can take in lots of different spaces. In Liverpool at the moment, through the last year, they've sown meadows at scale across large swathes of public parks, and this is like a huge transformation that has happened from with a you know, I think it's originally a grassroots organisation that started it up, but they've these sorts of sort of centralised projects where you're able to. I'm really interested to see how this progresses, because you'll be able to see that you'll develop a change in perception, I think, amongst the community, because you'll be showing people that another way is possible, something else, a different way of managing our land is possible, and that it's not going to change your life that much. It's not gonna take away from the other you know, functions that you might want from your green space, but it can make a really big difference for example, biodiversity. And I think that those sorts of big, bold projects, well, yeah, there are more and more of them, and they can come. You do need that sort of centralised push, though, because sometimes you need the permissions for access to space, and especially if you're making large-scale changes to what are formerly urbanised environments, that requires a lot of money and requires a lot of coordination. If you want to put more trees into your city, you've got to rip up a lot of concrete, and that's not a trivial thing to do. It's costly, and it requires a lot of organisation. I did want to say something about what Penny was saying about appreciating what we already have on our doorstep, though, and in terms of food as well, just in terms of a little bit of work that I was involved in a while ago, where we looked at the existing food resources across 3 small towns just north of London, and we looked at we looked at what the food production potential was with just what was already there, with people's back gardens, with people's allotments, and with existing fruit trees. And by sort of some modelled estimates, we said that you could produce about what the whole population needed in terms of fruit and vegetable consumption for 30 days, just without changing anything that was already going on in the city. There's actually quite a lot of food production going on, and some of it which we don't take advantage of. And just by slightly increasing the amount of, you know, maximally using allotments to their, you know, 75% capacity, and using a little bit more of everybody's gardens for food production without taking the whole garden, you could increase that to about over half the annual demand for the area. And that's without, I mean, obviously transforming the whole urban environment would be fantastic for so many reasons, but that's without even putting in green walls or green roofs or changing that. We have quite a lot already in our environment. Some of it is just seeing the space that we have through a different lens and through its potential, but also probably reducing the air pollution so that all of that food is edible and healthy.
Yeah, wonderful examples there, Brownie. Thanks. Yeah, a wealth of opportunity is in our urban environment, so that's a really good reminder. Lucelia, we've had a little conversation before this around some of the challenges of practically combining all these different priorities. Do you want to speak a little more to how some of those tensions can be perhaps overcome?
Well, I think there isn't. First, we need to think that there isn't one solution. for the problems. There's several solutions, and there'll be several different scales. And I think that's a very important point to think about, because once we have let's say a government big announcement, we are going to go net zero carbon by 2050. Between that and that permeating down to the ground onto actually policies that we can adopt, or we can enforce within our local communities, is several years of delay. So, for example, if Nottingham 2028 targets, if from government's point of view, new housing doesn't need to be zero carbon enabled. I'm not saying they're going to be zero carbon enabled until 2025, leaving us with only 3 years. So that is too late. It's too late. So we need that to happen, but we also need the communities and the localities and the areas to come together and put pressure and respond to things. And it occurred to me, I was listening to Penney and Bryony, that we've got a nice garden. We're quite in the city centre, and I've got a 2 and a 3 years old, 2 little girls, and I try to plant food with them to so they, you know, not loads of food, but what we can while they're small, because they can't help that much. But we planted carrots, and my little one, my 2.5 years old, she was very excited about getting the carrots, and the ones that we got, she just loved and ate them all. And now the wildlife has eaten all the carrots. So I've got this conflict in my garden between having greenery that feeds my family and having very well-fed wildlife that takes all the food. But I think at a micro level, we all can do little bits that we can also reserve. And it might be planting some of it might not be everything, and it might not have the capacity in your garden, but it might have a windowsill. You might have a house that can allow you to upgrade and get to be more energy efficient and more comfortable, more welcoming to maybe wildlife. There's lots of little things we can do. And a combination of those things can cause a big impact. So if all the neighbors within a neighborhood prioritize wildlife within their gardens, then wildlife has a chance of thriving from going to garden, from greener to greener, and having those connections. And it might sound small, but maybe your hedgehog door might allow your hedgehog family to meet another hedgehog family across the road and make new hedgehogs across the garden. So I think there's a big scale, there's a top-down approach that has to happen, because some things will not be enforced or will not be able to ask people to do if they're not there as policies, and they must be in place. There's also a micro scale and a place where we all come and meet and say, actually, I'm taking ownership of this. This is also my city. This is also my problem. And therefore, I'm going to respond by changing my home, changing my habits, and then changing my garden, or just teaching my kids that carrots do come from the ground. And there's another place in between where there's a city level, which I don't call a top level down, because they have less powers that are coming from above government. And maybe I know my comment a bit more on that. But it's also not necessarily a community, but there's a place in between where we can meet as a city, and we can make decisions as a city, where we can push both sides up and down and can enable those things to happen. So I think the solutions will come of various scales, and it will be places where you can prioritize one thing over the other, and that's going to have to be decided. And there'll be times where some people will be disappointed too. And I've been recently having this conversation: what would happen if you can't deliver net zero carbon on one of the schemes you're working on? Well, if I can't, and then there's a good justification, then I can't, and I'll find another way to give something else back, because it's difficult. And if I have any of my students there, they would have heard this all the time. You're juggling lots of things, and sometimes the ball will have to drop, but you're going to have to really be strong about why you're going to keep the balls that you have kept, and you nurture them and make them happen, because you're going to keep them all going at the same time. So a bit of flexibility, a bit of pressure from all sides, and a bit of ownership, and saying this is also my problem, and it's not a matter of pushing the people up there to do something, but it can start with me.
Thanks, Lucelia. Alan, do you have any thoughts on that idea of these urban challenges being multi-dimensional, but also multi-scalar? How do we overcome some of those inherent challenges? You're on mute, Alan.
Okay. Right. Yes, there are 3 thoughts that struck me, Chris. The first is stories. We need good stories to share because they are incredibly empowering when you look at the processes of social change. And so, and most people, in areas like, the Meadows in the middle of Nottingham, where I do quite a lot of work, people are too busy to go and do the sort of international story collecting. But, we've got to take some responsibilities to be collectors and sharers of the best ideas, because people need to feel excited about change, and if they can see others already engaged in it, then there's a transfer of power too. The second is we need to look imaginatively at making better use of what we have, and one of those things is the context of Nottingham or an economic recovery. Instead of there being a priority to new build, when the pandemic opens up properly, we will discover huge tranches of unoccupied buildings for offices and shops that aren't going to be filled by a new shop till you drop mentality. And so we need to take the embodied carbon that has gone into those buildings and use that in preference to the notion that we just have to cave into the ideas or the demands of big developers for new carbon consumption in gas guzzling buildings for the future. So better use of what we have. And the third element is we all have to be insistent on the need for rule changes. Nottingham is a really good example of this. We had until recently a local energy company, the Robin Hood Energy Company, that went bankrupt and has been the source of great controversy, and the government threatening to take over the governance of the city if the tight controls aren't put in. I just want to put down on record that at the same time, and for the last 20 or 30 years in Germany, they have had over 200 similar municipal energy companies, all of which are prospering. The 3 or 4 that have tried to set up in the UK have failed. Why? Because in Germany, you have the right of what's called local supply, where the energy generated by a local energy company can be sold back to local people at lower costs than going through the grid. So you're not having to have a merry-go-round, a national merry-go-round of energy supply. And everyone there is a beneficiary, apart from the big energy companies that Germany inherited. And so if you want to radically reduce your carbon footprint, you just get into localized systems of consuming less, generating more, and doing so sustainably, and sharing. And this isn't rocket science. We need to insist that in the UK, we should have the same rights to live more sustainably that other parts of Europe already have. So, to act as a sort of clarion call for the same rights that exist elsewhere would be a massive change element that might get us all out of jail.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alan. That's really helpful to have those 3 different takeaways, stories, using what we've got, and that kind of structural change, the rule change. Absolutely.